My name is Viola, 61 years old, and I never expected to be a widow at this stage of my life. 6 months ago, my husband Frank died suddenly of a heart attack after 32 wonderful years of marriage. What nobody knows, not even our son Michael or his wife Jessica, is that Frank secretly left me a second house in my hometown, 2 cars, and a substantial bank account, all in my name only. I kept this information to myself as Frank had requested in his final letter to me. Thank God I followed his wishes, because just 1 week after the funeral, I discovered something about Michael and Jessica that broke my heart and changed everything. If you want to hear how my late husband's foresight saved me from a terrible fate, please hit that subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from. Trust me, this story might save your future too. I was born and raised in the south side of Chicago to working-class parents who taught me the value of hard work and saving for a rainy day. My father worked at the steel mill for 40 years, and my mother cleaned houses to help make ends meet. They scraped together enough to put me through community college, where I earned an associate degree in business administration. With my new credentials, I landed a job as an administrative assistant at Wilson Construction, a mid-sized company owned by Frank Wilson, the man who would eventually become my husband. When I first met Frank, I was 28 and focused entirely on building my career. Romance was the last thing on my mind, especially with my boss, who was 10 years my senior. Frank was from a completely different world than mine. His family had old money from real estate investments, and he had started his construction company with a generous loan from his father. Despite our different backgrounds, Frank was surprisingly down to earth. He often joined his crews for lunch and knew every employee by name. Unlike other wealthy people I had encountered, Frank never flaunted his money or looked down on those with less. Our relationship developed slowly. First, there were innocent conversations by the coffee machine, then working lunches to discuss company projects, and eventually Frank asked me to dinner, carefully clarifying it was not a work obligation. I hesitated, concerned about workplace dynamics, but there was something genuine about Frank that made me take the chance. That first date at a small Italian restaurant away from our usual business circles revealed a man who was thoughtful, interesting, and remarkably unpretentious despite his privilege. Frank talked about growing up with wealth and how it had shaped his perspective in unexpected ways. "I saw too many of my friends become entitled and useless," he told me that night. "Their parents gave them everything without teaching them the value of earning it. I promised myself I would never let money ruin my character." After a year of dating, Frank proposed, and despite warnings from friends about marrying my boss and the vast differences in our backgrounds, I said yes. We were married in a simple ceremony with just close friends and family. Frank's parents attended, but were noticeably cool toward me, clearly believing their son could have married someone from their social circle. I was determined to prove my worth to them, not through wealth, but through my dedication to Frank and our future together. The early years of our marriage were focused on building the construction company into something substantial. Frank had vision and charisma, while I brought organizational skills and attention to detail. Together, we transformed Wilson Construction from a mid-sized local operation to a regional powerhouse that eventually handled major commercial projects across 3 states. As the company grew, so did our personal wealth, but Frank remained committed to living modestly compared to what we could afford. We bought a beautiful home in a nice Chicago suburb, but nothing ostentatious, and Frank continued driving his practical truck rather than splurging on luxury vehicles. 7 years into our marriage, our son Michael was born. From the moment I held him, my world centered around this perfect little boy with Frank's warm brown eyes and my stubborn chin. Frank was an involved father from the start, changing diapers, walking the floor with a colicky baby, and later coaching Little League. As Michael grew, Frank was deliberate about teaching him the same values that had shaped his own life, particularly around money and work ethic. "A man needs to make his own way," Frank would say. "The satisfaction of earning something can never be matched by having it handed to you." He gave Michael an allowance tied to chores, encouraged him to take summer jobs as a teenager, and was careful not to spoil him with excessive gifts or privileges. When Michael was 16 and asked for a car, Frank offered to match whatever Michael could save from his part-time job at the local hardware store. It took Michael nearly a year to save enough for a modest used car, and the pride on his face when he finally drove it home was evidence of Frank's wisdom. Despite these lessons, I noticed concerning signs as Michael entered his late teens. Unlike his father, he seemed preoccupied with status symbols and often complained that his friends had nicer things. When he left for college, He chose a prestigious private university despite Frank's suggestion that he consider the excellent state school that offered him a partial scholarship. Image matters in building connections, Michael argued, and Frank reluctantly agreed to pay the much higher tuition, hoping the education would ultimately prove worthwhile. It was during his sophomore year at college that Michael met Jessica, a beautiful, polished young woman studying business management. From their first visit home together, I sensed something calculating beneath her charming exterior. Her questions often circled back to our business, the size of our home, and even subtle inquiries about Frank's family money. Frank noticed too, but cautioned me against jumping to conclusions. Michael is smart, he assured me. He will see through any insincerity eventually. But Michael was besotted. Jessica became his entire world, and her influence was immediately apparent. His calls home became less frequent, and when he did visit, he spoke in phrases that sounded like Jessica rather than our son. After graduation, they married in an extravagant ceremony that Jessica insisted was necessary for networking purposes, despite Frank's offer to put that money toward a house down payment instead. The years that followed showed a pattern that increasingly worried Frank and me. Michael and Jessica lived well beyond their means, financing a lifestyle that projected success rather than building actual financial security. They bought a house in an exclusive neighborhood with a minimal down payment, leased luxury cars they struggled to afford, and took lavish vacations documented meticulously on social media. Meanwhile, Michael bounced between jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to build a career, always convinced the next opportunity would be his big break. Frank tried to counsel Michael privately about financial responsibility, offering to help them create a budget and investment plan, but these conversations invariably ended in tension. "You do not understand modern careers, Dad," Michael would say dismissively. "Things work differently now than in your day." As Frank entered his 60s, health issues began to emerge. First hypertension, then a minor stroke that served as a wake-up call. During his recovery, he became increasingly reflective and concerned about the future. One evening, as we sat on our back porch watching the sunset, he confided his deep worry about what would happen to me if he died first. "Michael and Jessica see our assets as their future windfall," he said quietly. "I love our son, but I do not trust his judgment or his wife's intentions. I need to make sure you are protected." In the months that followed, Frank began making discreet arrangements with our attorney, Jonathan Stevens. I was aware of some changes, but not the full extent of his planning. Frank assured me everything would be explained when necessary, and trusting his judgment, as I had throughout our marriage, I did not press for details. What I did not know then was that Frank was systematically transferring significant assets directly into my name, creating a financial safety net that would remain completely separate from what would become public after his death. The day that changed everything began like any other Tuesday. Frank and I had breakfast together discussing plans for the weekend and a charity event we were scheduled to attend. He kissed me goodbye before heading to the office, his usual "love you, Vi," the last words he would ever speak to me. 3 hours later, I received the call that he had collapsed during a meeting. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. A massive heart attack, the doctors said. Quick and likely painless, as if that could somehow soften the blow of losing my partner of more than 3 decades. The next few days passed in a blur of grief and surreal logistics. Michael and Jessica arrived within hours of my call, and while I was grateful for their presence, something about their behavior felt performative. Jessica took charge of funeral arrangements, sometimes making decisions without consulting me, while Michael spent hours on the phone with various family members and business associates. "Mom, have you talked to Dad's attorney yet?" Michael asked, the very evening they arrived, while I was still struggling to process that Frank was truly gone. "We should probably get the will sorted out soon. There will be a lot to manage with the company and everything." "Your father's body is not even cold," I said, shocked at his focus. "The will can wait until after we lay him to rest." The funeral was a large affair, befitting a man who had touched many lives through his business and charitable work. Frank's employees showed up en masse, many sharing stories of his fairness and generosity as a boss. Several major clients attended, as did representatives from the charities he had supported over the years. Throughout the service, I noticed Michael networking, exchanging business cards discreetly, as if the funeral were a business convention. Jessica stayed close to my side, playing the role of supportive daughter-in-law while subtly directing photographers to capture her comforting the widow. 3 days after the funeral, we met with Jonathan Stevens for the initial reading of the will. Michael arrived in a new designer suit, Jessica beside him in an appropriately somber but expensive black dress. Both seemed tense with anticipation as Jonathan began reviewing the document. The first shock came when Jonathan announced that Frank had sold the construction company 2 years earlier to his longtime second-in-command, Robert Jenkins. The sale had been structured as a gradual buyout that would conclude just 3 months after Frank's death. "Sold it without telling any of us." Michael's voice rose in disbelief. "That was my inheritance. I was supposed to take over the company." "Your father never indicated that was his plan," Jonathan replied calmly. "In fact, he specifically noted that you had shown no interest in learning the business from the ground up, which he considered essential for leadership." Michael's face flushed with anger and embarrassment as Jonathan continued. The will specified certain family heirlooms for Michael along with a one-time cash bequest of $100,000. The family home was left to me along with our primary checking and savings accounts, which contained modest amounts as they had been our operating accounts. "That is it," Jessica interjected, her composure slipping. "What about the rest? The investment accounts, the vacation property, Frank's family money?" Jonathan looked at her steadily. "This constitutes the entirety of the will as it pertains to familial distribution," he said. "There are charitable donations and employee considerations as well." "This is ridiculous." Michael stood pacing the office. "Dad was worth millions. Where is it all Mom must have manipulated him when he was sick? This cannot be legal." I was as confused as they were, though for different reasons. While I knew Frank had been making some arrangements, I had no idea he had sold the company, and the will did indeed seem to leave much of our accumulated wealth unaccounted for. After 20 minutes of Michael's accusations and Jessica's cold, calculating glares, they stormed out of the office, Michael tossing a "we will be contacting our own attorney" over his shoulder as they left. In the sudden silence of the office, I turned to Jonathan. "I do not understand. What happened to everything else? Did Frank make donations I was not aware of?" Jonathan's expression softened. "Frank asked me to meet with you privately after the initial reading. He was very specific about the sequence of events." He pressed a button on his desk phone and asked his assistant to bring in a separate file. "This is unconventional," Jonathan admitted as he opened the thick folder, but Frank was adamant about his reasons. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in Frank's familiar handwriting and handed it to me first. With trembling hands, I opened the letter. "My dearest Viola," it began. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are facing the aftermath alone. I am so sorry for that. Please know that every decision I have made has been with your protection and security in mind. Over the past 5 years, I have been quietly transferring significant assets directly into your name. These include our lake house in your hometown of Lake Geneva, which I purchased 3 years ago in your name only. You will also find 2 vehicles registered solely to you, stored at Anderson's garage, and a separate bank account at First National containing just over $2 million also in your name only. I have done this because I have grave concerns about Michael, and particularly Jessica's intentions regarding our wealth. Their pattern of financial irresponsibility has convinced me they would quickly deplete any inheritance, and worse, might attempt to access your resources as well. The modest bequest in my public will is deliberate. It will satisfy legal requirements while protecting the bulk of our assets. My request is that you keep these arrangements private unless absolutely necessary. Give Michael and Jessica time to demonstrate their true intentions toward you now that I am gone. I hope I am wrong about them. I hope they show you the love and support you deserve as you grieve. But if I am right, you now have the means to protect yourself without family conflict. You have been the light of my life, Viola. Your love made me a better man than I ever could have been without you. Trust your instincts as you move forward. You are stronger and wiser than you know. All my love, always, Frank." I lowered the letter, tears streaming down my face, overwhelmed by both grief and gratitude for my husband's foresight. Jonathan patiently explained the details of each asset Frank had mentioned, providing documentation of ownership and access instructions for the accounts. "Frank was very thorough," Jonathan explained. "Everything is legally in your name and has been for years. There can be no claim against these assets as part of the estate. The transfers were completed as gifts during his lifetime, all properly documented and taxes paid. As I drove home that afternoon, I felt conflicted about keeping such significant information from my son. Despite his behavior at the will reading, he was still my child, and secrecy felt contrary to the values Frank and I had tried to instill. Yet Frank's request gave me pause. He had been an excellent judge of character throughout his life. If he had concerns this serious, perhaps I should honor his wish to wait and observe before making any decisions. That evening, Michael called his tone noticeably warmer than when he had left the attorney's office. "Mom, Jessica, and I have been talking," he said, sounding conciliatory. "We reacted poorly earlier, and we are sorry. This is a difficult time for all of us. Why do not you come over for dinner tomorrow? We can talk about next steps and how we can help you adjust to this new reality." I accepted the invitation, deciding to take Frank's advice and observe their true intentions before revealing anything about the assets he had secured for me. The weeks following Frank's funeral were a strange dance of grief adjustment and increasing pressure from Michael and Jessica. Their approach shifted from the initial anger at the will reading to a concerning kind of solicitousness that felt calculated rather than caring. Michael began calling daily, often inquiring about how I was managing financially, with pointed questions about bill payments and whether Frank had left the household accounts in order. "You know, Mom," he said during one such call, "the house is really too big for just you now. All that maintenance and those utility bills must be overwhelming. Jessica and I think you should consider downsizing to something more manageable." What he meant, I soon discovered, was that I should sell the family home where Frank and I had lived for 28 years and move into something they deemed more appropriate for a widow. When I mentioned possibly staying for at least a year before making any major decisions, Michael exchanged a look with Jessica that I recognized from years of observing their unspoken communications. It was the look that said, "This is going to be harder than we thought." Jessica took a different approach, positioning herself as concerned about my emotional well-being. "Viola, all these memories must be so painful," she would say, gesturing around the living room where photos of Frank and our life together were displayed. A fresh start in a new place would be healthier psychologically. I read an article about this in Psychology Today. I began attending grief counseling sessions at a local community center, not just to process my loss, but also to discuss the moral dilemma I faced regarding Frank's secret arrangements. My counselor, Dr. Patrice Williams, became a valuable sounding board. "Your husband made these arrangements out of love and concern," she reminded me during one session. "He was trying to protect you. Give yourself permission to accept that protection while you are vulnerable. There will be time for complete transparency once you have healed and can make decisions from strength rather than grief." Her advice resonated particularly as Michael and Jessica's behavior became increasingly transparent. Their visits always included some subtle inventory of the house, with Jessica commenting on specific pieces of furniture or art in ways that felt like appraisal rather than appreciation. "This grandfather clock must be valuable. Is it an antique? Or, these silver candlesticks would look perfect in our dining room when you no longer need them." 6 weeks after Frank's death, they invited me to dinner at their home, an evening that would crystallize my concerns about their intentions. Their house was impressive from the outside, a new construction in an exclusive development with manicured landscaping and an imposing entrance. Inside, however, I noticed signs of financial strain beneath the surface. The furniture was clearly expensive but sparse, as if they had purchased showcase pieces for the main areas, but left other rooms nearly empty. Several shopping bags from luxury retailers sat in corners, items apparently purchased but not yet put away, tags still attached. Over an elaborate meal that Jessica mentioned repeatedly had been catered by an exclusive service that usually only handles celebrity events. They finally revealed their true purpose for the evening. "Mom, we have been thinking a lot about your situation," Michael began, pouring me another glass of wine I did not want. "The house Dad's accounts, all of it, is a lot for you to handle alone." Jessica nodded sympathetically. "We worry about you rattling around in that big house managing all those finances when you have never had to before." I bit back the reminder that I had been the one balancing the books for Frank's construction company for years before we hired a full-time accountant. Instead, I listened as they outlined their proposal. "We think the most sensible solution is for you to sign the house over to us," Michael continued. "We can handle the sale, which would free you from that burden. You could move into our guest suite until we find you a nice one-bedroom condo, or perhaps a room at Shady Pines, that new senior community across town." Jessica beamed as if they were offering me a luxury vacation rather than relegation to a spare room in their house or a facility I had never expressed interest in. "We would handle all your finances," she added. "Set up a monthly allowance so you would not have to worry about complicated money matters. You could just enjoy your golden years." At 47, I found the implication that I was somehow incapable of managing adult responsibilities both insulting and revealing of their true perspective. "That is a very comprehensive plan," I said carefully. "You have obviously given this a lot of thought. I will need some time to consider such major changes." Their faces betrayed momentary frustration before Jessica quickly recovered. "Of course, take your time, but not too long. We have a real estate agent who says the market is hot right now for homes in your neighborhood. We would not want you to miss the optimal selling window." After dinner, while Michael took a business call, I excused myself to use the restroom. Passing their home office, I noticed spreadsheets and documents spread across the desk. A quick glance revealed calculations of my home's potential sale value minus realtor fees, with the remaining amount incorporated into what appeared to be their household budget. There was no allocation for my future housing or care, just the full proceeds absorbed into their finances. Next to these papers was a brochure for Shady Pines with the monthly rate circled. It was for their most basic room, significantly less expensive than the luxury accommodations featured in their marketing materials. The drive home that evening was clarifying. Frank had been right about everything. Our son and his wife viewed me, not as family to be protected, but as a resource to be mined for their benefit. The assets Frank had secretly secured in my name were not just a comfort, they were potentially my only protection against being manipulated out of my home and independence. The following day, as I was sorting through Frank's clothes to donate to charity, Jessica stopped by unexpectedly. "I thought you might need help making decisions about Frank's things," she said brightly, though I had mentioned no such plans to her. While I made coffee, I noticed her taking photos of several items in the living room, including Frank's collection of vintage watches and the antique desk that had belonged to his grandfather. When she thought I was not looking, she opened a drawer of the desk, quickly rifling through papers inside. "Jessica, the coffee is ready," I called intentionally, giving her time to close the drawer and pretend she had not been snooping. During her visit, she repeatedly steered the conversation toward the proposed house sale and my moving in with them temporarily. When I remained non-committal, her friendly facade cracked slightly. "Michael and I really need to know your decision soon," she said, an edge entering her voice. "We have financial considerations of our own, you know. Taking you in is a big responsibility." After she left, I found a real estate agent's business card that had fallen from her purse onto the entryway floor. The agent's name was circled along with a handwritten note, "Colry Wilson Property Pre-Listing Agreement." That evening, I received a call from Eleanor Simmons, a friend who worked at Chicago First Bank, where Michael had his accounts. We had known each other for years through community volunteer work, and while I knew she could not ethically share specific account details, her carefully worded concern told me everything I needed to know. "Viola, I cannot say much, but as a friend who cares about you, I want to make sure you are making financial decisions with full awareness right now," she said. "There are people who might try to take advantage of your vulnerable state. Please consult your own financial advisor before signing anything." The implications were clear. Whatever financial troubles Michael and Jessica were experiencing, they must be serious enough to worry someone who had visibility into their accounts. Eleanor's professional risk in making even this vague warning underscored the gravity of the situation. The final revelation came the next morning, when I received a call from Harriet Johnson, a neighbor whose son worked for a local real estate office. "Viola, I hope you do not mind me calling, but Marcus mentioned something concerning," she said hesitantly. "He says your house has been listed as a potential coming-to-market property at his agency. The agent claims to be working with parties who have power of attorney for you. I know Frank just passed, and I wanted to make sure this was something you had authorized." Power of attorney. They were already claiming legal authority to act on my behalf without my knowledge or consent. In that moment, Frank's protective measures no longer felt like an option to consider. They were a lifeline I needed to grab immediately. I spent a sleepless night processing the depth of betrayal I felt. My own son was actively working to strip me of my home and independence under the guise of caring for me. The realization was physically painful, a hollowness in my chest that felt like grief anew, not just for Frank, but for the relationship with my son I had thought we had. At 7 the next morning, I called Jonathan Stevens and requested an emergency meeting. By 9, I was in his office sharing the developments of the past week, the dinner proposal, Jessica's snooping the real estate card, Eleanor's warning, and finally the disturbing news about the power of attorney claims. Jonathan listened with professional calm, but I could see concern in his eyes as he took detailed notes. Frank suspected something like this might happen, he said when I finished. It is why he was so meticulous about separating assets and placing them solely in your name. What are my options? I asked. I do not want to completely destroy my relationship with my son, but I cannot allow him to take control of my life this way. First, we need to establish clear legal protections, Jonathan advised. I recommend we immediately file documentation affirming your mental and physical competence with the county. I will arrange for an independent medical evaluation today if possible, which will create a recent record showing you are fully capable of managing your own affairs. He continued outlining a comprehensive plan. Second, we should transfer the deed to your primary residence into the same trust structure Frank established for your other properties. This will prevent any claims against it. Third, I suggest we respond to these power of attorney claims directly and firmly with legal notices to any institutions where Michael might attempt to use such claims. As Jonathan outlined these protective measures, he shared that Michael had indeed been making inquiries about declaring me incompetent due to grief and advancing age. He consulted with one of my colleagues last week, trying to determine the easiest path to establishing guardianship. Fortunately, my colleague recognized your name as my client's widow and alerted me to the inquiry without revealing any details to Michael. The systematic nature of their plan was shocking. This was not a hasty decision made in financial desperation, but a calculated strategy developed over weeks, possibly even before Frank's death. The thought made me physically ill. Should I confront them directly? I asked Jonathan, or just proceed with these legal protections quietly? He considered this carefully. In my experience, direct confrontation in a controlled environment often reveals valuable information and can prevent future claims that you were secretive or deceptive. I would suggest inviting them to a discussion, perhaps here in my office, where I can serve as a mediator and witness. I decided on a different approach, wanting to see their behavior when they believed they were close to succeeding with their plan. That afternoon, I called Michael and told him I had been thinking about their proposal and was ready to discuss details. The relief in his voice was palpable, and he immediately suggested they come over that evening. Bring any paperwork you think might be helpful, I added, intentionally vague. I want to understand exactly what you are proposing. Great, Mom. Jessica already has some documents prepared that will make everything really simple for you. We will handle all the complicated parts. I am sure they would, I thought, as I hung up. When they arrived at 7, I had prepared coffee and Frank's favorite butter cookies, a touch of normalcy to disarm them. Michael seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with his watch and checking his phone repeatedly. Jessica, by contrast, was practically triumphant, carrying a portfolio of documents and speaking with the confident tone of someone who believes they have already won. We are so glad you are being sensible about this, Viola, she said, spreading papers across the dining room table. It really is the best solution for everyone. I recognized several documents, power of attorney forms, property transfer deeds, and what appeared to be preliminary paperwork for the assisted living facility they had mentioned. All were filled out, requiring only my signature. Before we get to the paperwork, I said calmly, I would like to better understand your current financial situation. Frank always emphasized the importance of full financial transparency in major decisions. Michael and Jessica exchanged a quick glance. Our finances are not really relevant to this discussion, Jessica replied smoothly. This is about what is best for you. Still, I would feel more comfortable knowing that you are financially stable enough to take on responsibility for my care, I persisted. For instance, how are the mortgage payments going on this house? It must be quite expensive. Michael's expression tightened. The mortgage is fine. We are managing just fine. That is good to hear. I nodded. And the credit cards Frank always warned about carrying too much high-interest debt. Mom, our finances are private, Michael said sharply. We did not come here to have you interrogate us about our personal affairs. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time to be direct. I ask because I have reason to believe you are in serious financial trouble, the kind that might motivate you to try to sell my house and access my accounts. Jessica's pleasant mask slipped immediately. Who has been talking to you? That is completely untrue. Is it? I challenged, looking directly at her. Then why have you already spoken to a real estate agent about selling my house? Why was there a pre-listing agreement for the Wilson property in your purse last week? And most concerning, why is there a real estate agent under the impression that you have power of attorney for me? The color drained from Michael's face as Jessica sputtered denials. I continued calmly. I have also learned about the Shady Pines brochure on your desk with the cheapest room option circled, not the luxury accommodations you described to me. You were snooping in our house, Jessica accused quickly, trying to shift blame. I saw documents in plain sight, I corrected, just as I have seen you photographing valuables in my home and going through Frank's desk when you thought I was not looking. Michael finally spoke, his voice strained. Mom, you do not understand our situation. We have had some temporary financial setbacks. The business investment I told you about fell through, and there were some unexpected tax issues. Tax issues resulting from unreported income. I guessed watching his expression confirm my suspicion. And by temporary setbacks, do you mean the 3 months of mortgage payments you have missed, or the maxed out credit cards Eleanor hinted about? That interfering old bat had no right, Jessica hissed, confirming Eleanor's risk in warning me had been justified. We are trying to help you, Michael insisted, though his argument was weakening visibly. You should not be alone in that big house. What you are trying to do is use me to solve your financial problems, I said, my voice firm but sad. You plan to sell my home, place me in the cheapest possible care facility, and use the proceeds to bail yourselves out of debt. Jessica's facade finally shattered completely. What choice do we have? She snapped. We are facing bankruptcy, while you sit in this paid-off house with all these assets you do not even need at your age. You could live comfortably in a small apartment or senior living. You are being selfish, holding on to all this when your own son needs help. Michael did not contradict her or defend me, his silence more damning than any words could have been. He simply stared at the table, avoiding my eyes, tacitly endorsing his wife's entitled perspective. I am 61 years old, not 90, I said quietly. I am in good health, mentally competent, and perfectly capable of managing my own life. I will not be signing over my home or granting you power of attorney. Jessica's eyes narrowed dangerously. You might not have a choice. Grief can affect cognitive function, especially in older adults. A judge might well agree that you need supervision for your own protection. The threat was unmistakable. Are you threatening to have me declared incompetent? I asked, wanting her to say it explicitly. We are trying to protect you from yourself. Michael finally spoke, though he still could not meet my eyes. Dad would want us to make sure you are taken care of. Your father, I said deliberately, would be ashamed of what you are doing right now. You have no idea what Dad would think, Michael shouted, finally showing his true emotions. He left nothing for me after all my years expecting to take over the company. He abandoned his responsibilities to his son, and now I am drowning in debt while you get everything. There it was, the resentment and entitlement that had been building for years finally exposed in raw form. Frank had seen it clearly while I had tried to deny it, always making excuses for our son's behavior. I would like you both to leave now, I said, standing up and gathering their unsigned documents into a pile. I suggest you seek financial counseling rather than attempting to solve your problems by taking advantage of me. Jessica grabbed her portfolio, shoving papers inside haphazardly. This is not over, Viola. You are clearly not thinking rationally, and we have options for dealing with that. As they left, Michael paused at the door, a flicker of shame crossing his face before Jessica pulled him toward their car. I watched them drive away, my heart heavy, but my resolve strengthened. Tomorrow I would begin implementing the legal protections Jonathan had recommended. Frank had been right about everything, and his foresight had saved me from a fate I could scarcely imagine. The aftermath of that confrontation unfolded rapidly. By 9 the next morning, I was in Jonathan's office signing paperwork to protect my assets and formally document my mental competence. By noon, I had appointments scheduled with 2 different physicians for evaluations to create an unimpeachable record of my capacity to manage my own affairs. By 5 that afternoon, Jonathan had sent formal cease and desist notices to any financial institutions where Michael might attempt to present fraudulent power of attorney documents. I had barely returned home when the first response arrived, a certified letter from an attorney representing Michael and Jessica claiming I was suffering from complicated grief and age-related cognitive decline that rendered me incapable of making sound financial decisions. They were petitioning for emergency guardianship with Michael as the proposed guardian of both my person and estate. The letter included patronizing language about their deep concern for my well-being and painful recognition that I needed intervention for my own protection. The following day, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street from my house. The same vehicle appeared the next day, and the next always with the same middle-aged man inside, sometimes with a camera pointed toward my home. Jonathan confirmed my suspicion that this was likely a private investigator hired by Michael and Jessica's attorney to document any behavior that could be construed as evidence of incompetence. "This is actually helpful for us," Jonathan assured me. "Live your normal life, demonstrate your independence and competence. Every day they observe you functioning normally strengthens our position." I followed his advice, maintaining my regular schedule with deliberate visibility. I drove myself to the grocery store, attended my weekly book club at the library, and worked in my garden. I made a point of chatting with neighbors, exchanging pleasantries with the postal carrier, and even waving to the investigator, occasionally letting him know I was aware of his presence and unfazed by it. Meanwhile, Jonathan was building our case, collecting statements from friends, my doctor of 15 years, and even Frank's former colleagues who could attest to my significant role in helping manage a multi-million-dollar construction company. I kept a daily journal documenting my activities, conversations, and decisions, creating contemporaneous evidence of my mental clarity. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. As it approached, I found myself oddly calm. The initial shock and hurt of Michael and Jessica's betrayal had crystallized into a steely determination to protect myself and the legacy Frank had thoughtfully created for me. 2 days before the hearing, Jonathan called with news that underscored the urgency of our situation. "We have obtained their financial records through discovery," he explained. "It is worse than we thought. They are 3 months behind on their mortgage with foreclosure proceedings beginning. They have over $120,000 in credit card debt across 8 different cards, all maxed out. There are also tax liens for unpaid income taxes for the past 2 years." "How is that possible?" I asked, stunned at the magnitude of their financial distress. "Michael makes a good salary, and Jessica has her consulting business. According to the records, they have been living on approximately twice their actual income for several years," Jonathan explained. "Taking expensive vacations, buying luxury goods, leasing vehicles they cannot afford. It appears they have been operating under the assumption that they would eventually receive a substantial inheritance from Frank that would clear all their debts. Their desperation suddenly made more sense, as did the aggressive timeline of their attempts to gain control of my assets. They were not just greedy, they were drowning financially and saw me as their life raft." The morning of the hearing arrived with a crystalline clarity I had not felt since before Frank's death. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue suit that projected both respectability and competence, arranged my silver-streaked hair in a neat style, and wore minimal, appropriate makeup. Image should not matter in legal proceedings, but Jonathan had been clear that judges, being human, are influenced by presentations and first impressions. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined, with dark wood paneling and the slightly too cool temperature common to public buildings. Michael and Jessica sat on one side with their attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit who was busy arranging documents. Jessica had adopted a concerned, almost mournful expression that I recognized from the funeral, her supportive daughter-in-law performance in full effect. Michael looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around the room, unable to settle on me. Judge Raymond Mercer, a distinguished-looking man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, called the court to order precisely at 9. He began by explaining that guardianship proceedings were serious matters that required clear and convincing evidence, as they involved potentially removing an individual's autonomy and civil rights. Michael and Jessica's attorney presented, first painting a melodramatic picture of a grief-stricken widow unable to cope with financial realities after being sheltered by her husband for decades. She presented carefully selected evidence photos of me looking tired and disheveled at Frank's funeral, hardly surprising testimony from a grocery clerk who recalled me becoming confused about which credit card to use one afternoon, and most disturbingly edited excerpts from conversations with Michael, where I had allegedly expressed confusion about household matters. Jessica took the stand, delivering a performance worthy of an award. "We are just so worried about her," she testified, dabbing at non-existent tears. "Since Frank died, she forgets appointments, leaves burners on, and cannot seem to keep track of her bills. We found unopened statements when we visited. She needs structure and supervision for her own safety." The unopened statements had been promotional materials I had set aside to sort through later, but in Jessica's telling, they became evidence of financial disarray. Each minor normal occurrence in my life had been reframed as a sign of dangerous decline. Michael's testimony seemed more reluctant, as if some small part of him recognized the dishonesty in their claims. Nevertheless, coached by his wife and their attorney, he described instances where I had supposedly shown poor judgment or confusion. "She gets overwhelmed easily now," he claimed. "Dad always handled the important decisions. She never had to deal with these things before." Their hired medical expert, a psychiatrist who had never met or examined me, testified about typical patterns of cognitive decline in elderly individuals suffering bereavement, carefully using hypotheticals while implying they applied specifically to me. When Jonathan began our defense, his approach was methodical and devastating. Rather than immediately addressing their claims about my mental state, he first established the context for their petition. "Your Honor, before we address Mrs. Wilson's competence, which we will prove beyond any doubt, it is important to understand the motivation behind this sudden concern for her welfare," he began. "I would like to enter into evidence the financial records of Michael and Jessica Wilson obtained through discovery." He proceeded to detail their dire financial situation, the massive debt, missed mortgage payments, tax liens, and pattern of reckless spending. Their attorney objected repeatedly, claiming these matters were irrelevant to my competence, but Judge Mercer allowed the evidence, noting that motivation was indeed relevant in evaluating the credibility of their claims. "Now," Jonathan continued, "I would like to present Mrs. Wilson's medical evaluations conducted independently by two different board-certified geriatric specialists within the past 2 weeks. Both doctors had found me to be an excellent cognitive health scoring in the highest percentiles on all standard assessments. Their reports explicitly stated there was no medical basis whatsoever for guardianship or any other limitation on my independence. Next came character witnesses, my grief counselor who testified to my healthy processing of loss, Frank's former business partner who described my substantial role in building the construction company, and my neighbor of 20 years who saw me regularly and could attest to my consistent independent functioning. When I finally took the stand, I felt a calm certainty. I answered questions clearly and directly, demonstrating my awareness of financial matters, my ongoing activities, and my plans for the future. When Michael and Jessica's attorney attempted to confuse me with rapid-fire questions about specific dates or complex financial details, I remained composed, answering what I knew and calmly acknowledging what I would need to verify a sign of wisdom rather than weakness. The turning point came when Jonathan asked me directly about the guardianship petition. "Mrs. Wilson, why do you believe your son and daughter-in-law have filed this petition?" I looked directly at Michael, who finally met my eyes. "They are in serious financial trouble of their own making. They believe that gaining control of my assets would solve their problems. When I refused to voluntarily sign over my home and accounts to them, they decided to try to take control through legal means instead." "And what makes you believe this is their motivation?" "They told me so," I said simply. "During a conversation at my home, Jessica explicitly stated that I was being selfish for keeping assets that I do not even need at your age. When my son needs financial help, they had already contacted a real estate agent about selling my house before even discussing it with me, and they had researched the cheapest possible room at an assisted living facility where they planned to place me." The judge leaned forward at this. "Mrs. Wilson, are you stating that the petitioners had made arrangements to sell your property before filing this petition?" "Yes, Your Honor. They had spoken with a real estate agent who believed they already had power of attorney for me. I have the business card that fell from Jessica's purse with notes about a pre-listing agreement for my property." Jonathan submitted this evidence along with statements from the real estate agent confirming that Michael and Jessica had represented themselves as having legal authority to sell my home. As our case concluded, I could see the judge's expression had shifted from neutral to concerned. His attention focused more on Michael and Jessica than on me. Their attorney attempted to redirect attention to my supposed impairments in her closing arguments, but her claims now seemed hollow against the substantial evidence of my competence and their financial motivations. Before issuing his ruling, Judge Mercer asked Jonathan a question that opened the door to the final revelation. "Counsel, there has been discussion of Mrs. Wilson's financial affairs, but little specific information. For the court to evaluate whether financial exploitation is a genuine concern, I need to understand the scope of assets potentially at stake." Jonathan glanced at me, receiving my slight nod of permission. Your Honor, this information was not initially presented as Mrs. Wilson is a private person who does not wish to have her financial details unnecessarily exposed. However, given the nature of these proceedings, I am authorized to disclose the following. He then methodically outlined the assets Frank had secured for me. The second home in Lake Geneva, valued at approximately $700,000, two vehicles collectively worth $90,000, and the bank account containing just over $2 million, all legally in my name alone and separate from Frank's estate. The courtroom fell silent. Michael's mouth literally dropped open while Jessica went rigid in her seat, her calculating mind visibly processing this new information. Their attorney looked equally stunned, clearly having been led to believe they were pursuing control of a modest widow's estate, not substantial assets that had never been part of Frank's probated will. Judge Mercer's ruling was decisive and unequivocal. Having reviewed all evidence presented, this court finds no basis whatsoever for the establishment of guardianship over Viola Wilson. The petitioners have failed to provide credible evidence of any cognitive impairment or inability to manage her affairs. On the contrary, the evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates Mrs. Wilson's continued competence and independence. He continued, his tone growing stern. More concerning to this court is the apparent attempt by the petitioners to gain control of significant assets through misrepresentation and potentially fraudulent claims. The evidence suggests this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Wilson's welfare, but as an attempt to address the petitioner's own financial difficulties through inappropriate means. Looking directly at Michael and Jessica, he added, "This court does not look favorably on attempts to abuse guardianship proceedings for financial gain. Such actions not only waste judicial resources but can cause significant trauma to the targeted individuals." He dismissed their petition with prejudice, meaning they could not simply refile it, and further ordered that any future petitions regarding my capacity would require special permission from the court and would trigger an automatic review of this case's findings. As the judge stood to leave, Jessica suddenly erupted, unable to contain her fury at seeing their financial salvation slipping away. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, rising from her seat. "She is hiding assets that should rightfully come to her son. Frank would have wanted Michael to have that money, not her hoarding it for herself." "Ms. Wilson, control yourself," Judge Mercer warned sharply. "We are drowning in debt while she has millions sitting in accounts doing nothing. She does not need 2 houses and all that money at her age. What is she going to do with it? We have our whole lives ahead of us." Her outburst confirmed everything the evidence had suggested about their motivations, removing any lingering doubt in the judge's mind. "Bailiff, please escort Ms. Wilson from the courtroom if she cannot maintain appropriate behavior," he directed before addressing me directly. "Mrs. Wilson, this court affirms your right to manage your own affairs without interference. Should you experience any further harassment regarding these matters, do not hesitate to return to this court for assistance." As we left the courtroom, Michael attempted to approach me, but Jonathan stepped between us protectively. "Any communication should go through counsel for the time being," he advised firmly. Michael's expression showed conflict, resignation, shame, but also lingering resentment. Jessica stormed ahead without looking back, already on her phone, likely seeking new financial lifelines now that their plan had failed so completely. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet, a mixture of relief, vindication, and deep sadness. I had protected myself as Frank had intended, but at the cost of my relationship with my only child. Despite their actions, he was still my son, and the maternal instinct to protect and forgive remained complicated now by necessary boundaries and painful awareness. In the weeks following the court hearing, I made decisions that would reshape my life moving forward. The family home, once filled with happy memories, now felt tainted by Michael and Jessica's attempts to take it from me. After careful consideration, I decided to make the move to the Lake Geneva house Frank had purchased in my name. The lakeside community had been my childhood home, and returning there felt like both a fresh start and a homecoming. The process of packing up 32 years of married life was both physically taxing and emotionally complex. Each item I wrapped represented a memory, a vacation souvenir, a gift from Frank, photographs of happier times when Michael was a child and our family felt whole. I worked methodically through each room, deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to place in storage until I could face making more permanent decisions. During this process, I heard nothing from Michael or Jessica. Their silence spoke volumes about the transactional nature of their interest in me. With no financial gain to be had, they apparently saw no reason to maintain contact. I alternated between relief at the absence of their manipulations and heartache at the finality of the rupture. 2 days before the moving trucks were scheduled to arrive, I was sorting through Frank's remaining clothes when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Michael standing alone on the porch, shifting uncomfortably from foot to foot like he had as a child when in trouble. After a moment's hesitation, I opened the door. "Mom," he said, simply looking older and more worn than I had ever seen him. "Can we talk?" I led him to the living room, now half-packed in boxes, and offered coffee, which he declined. We sat in awkward silence until he finally spoke. "Jessica and I separated," he said, staring at his hands. "After the court hearing. It has been coming for a while, but that day, seeing how far she was willing to go, what she expected me to do to my own mother," he trailed off, shaking his head. "I am sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Divorce is difficult. We are not officially divorcing yet. She is staying with her sister while we figure things out." He looked around at the boxes. "You are moving to Lake Geneva, to the house Dad bought for me." I watched his expression, seeing him process this confirmation of the assets he had learned about in court. "Why did not you tell me?" he asked finally. "About the house, the money, all of it. Did not you trust me?" The question carried layers of hurt defensiveness and perhaps genuine confusion. I considered my response carefully. "It was your father's explicit request that I keep those arrangements private," I said. "He was concerned about how you and Jessica managed money, the pattern of spending beyond your means. He wanted to ensure I would be secure regardless of what happened." Michael flinched but did not argue. "He never believed in me," he said quietly. "Never thought I could handle responsibility. He believed you needed to earn things rather than have them handed to you," I corrected gently. "He was trying to teach you self-reliance, not punish you. The same lessons his father taught him. But he left you millions while giving me just enough to pay off some debts." "Michael, look at me," I said firmly. "Your father and I built those assets together over 32 years of marriage. They are not your inheritance that I am somehow intercepting. They are the result of our life's work, and your father wanted to make sure I was taken care of in my remaining years, however many those might be." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I know. It is just, we were counting on that inheritance. We made financial decisions based on expecting it someday." "Which was exactly your father's concern," I pointed out. "Living your life waiting for someone to die so you can have their money is no way to live. He wanted better for you than that." We talked for nearly 2 hours, more honestly than we had in years. Michael admitted the extent of their financial troubles, how Jessica's lifestyle expectations had always exceeded their means, and his own weakness in not standing firm against spending they could not afford. He acknowledged that the guardianship attempt had been primarily Jessica's idea, but that he had gone along with it out of desperation and a sense of entitlement to family money. "I do not expect you to forgive me," he said as our conversation wound down. "What we tried to do to you was unforgivable. I just needed you to know that I see it now. I see how wrong it was, and I am ashamed. Forgiveness may take time," I acknowledged, "but you are still my son, and I still love you. That has not changed, even if our relationship needs new boundaries." As he prepared to leave, he paused by the door. "Dad was right, you know, about everything. About me, about Jessica, about what would happen when he was gone. I should have listened to him more when I had the chance." "He loved you very much," I said. "He just wanted you to become your own man, not a shadow of his success." After Michael left, I sat alone among the boxes processing our conversation. It had been a beginning, perhaps, but trust once broken would take long and consistent effort to rebuild. I was not naive enough to believe one conversation had changed everything, but it offered a glimmer of hope that all was not irreparably lost between us. The move to Lake Geneva marked the beginning of a new chapter. The lakeside house was smaller than our Chicago home, but perfectly sized for my needs, with large windows overlooking the water and a wraparound porch where I could enjoy morning coffee and evening sunsets. I found comfort in returning to the community where I had grown up, reconnecting with old friends and making new ones through local volunteer work. In an unexpected development that would have amused Frank, I found myself becoming an informal financial advisor to several women in similar circumstances, widows navigating their new financial independence, often while facing pressure from adult children or other family members. My experience had given me valuable perspective on the importance of financial literacy and self protection, even within families. This informal advising eventually evolved into a small foundation I established in Frank's name, focused on financial education for seniors, particularly women who had delegated financial management to spouses throughout their marriages. The work gave purpose to my days and honored Frank's commitment to financial independence and responsibility. Michael and I began rebuilding our relationship with small, careful steps. He entered financial counseling and took responsibility for the debts he and Jessica had accumulated, working out payment plans rather than seeking quick fixes. He called regularly, visited occasionally, and never asked about money. I appreciated these signs of growth but maintained the boundaries Frank's foresight had helped establish. 6 months after the move, I received divorce papers from Jessica in the mail listing me as a potential witness. Michael called that evening to explain she was claiming I had deliberately created division in their marriage and turned him against her. The allegation was absurd, but typical of her inability to accept responsibility for her own actions. I agreed to provide a statement if needed, but the divorce proceeded without my involvement finalized, with Jessica receiving far less than she had demanded initially. As I settled into my new life, I often felt Frank's presence, particularly during quiet evenings on the porch watching the lake. I imagined him sitting beside me, nodding with satisfaction at how his careful planning had protected me. "You were right," I would tell him in these imaginary conversations, about everything. Yet the most important lesson I had learned went beyond Frank's specific concerns about Michael and Jessica. It was the broader understanding that love sometimes requires difficult choices, establishing boundaries, withholding immediate assistance that would enable destructive patterns, and standing firm even when it feels easier to give in. True love, whether for a spouse, a child, or oneself, must be grounded in truth and responsibility, not blind acquiescence or martyrdom. On the anniversary of Frank's death, I visited his grave with a bouquet of his favorite sunflowers. "Thank you for protecting me," I said aloud, running my fingers over the engraved letters of his name. "Even when you could not be here yourself, your last gift to me was the strength to stand on my own." Have you ever had to protect yourself from the financial demands of family members? Or found yourself in a situation where keeping information private turned out to be the wisest choice? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. These family financial conflicts are more common than many realize, and sharing our experiences helps others recognize warning signs before it is too late. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with someone who might benefit from Frank's wisdom. Thank you for listening, and remember to protect your financial independence. It is often the foundation of all other freedoms in life.